Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as you can see, all these bins here have labels on them, with the exception of this one right here. You might be wondering why. Well, I took note of why that is, and I wrote it down here. It's sort of a reminder to myself on what I want to take care of in this system today. And not only in this system, which is the 130-day-old African nightcrawlers, there's also the system from which I pulled the worms to populate this system, and that's actually the system up here, these African nightcrawlers. Although at this point we did what we considered to be the final haul out of worms from here 10 days ago. We just figured one last try. We would put a little piece of bait out there with the assumption that we might be able to round up a few more worms. But 10 days later, it's my expectation that whatever worms we were able to gather are going to be the last of it. We're going to haul them out, and then this will be a done deal. We're going to do what I consider to be the official decommissioning of the bin by switching this label to be upside down. So that's on my checklist here. I'll flip the label, but I also wrote down get the sticker because I want to bring over the cool Northeast Worms sticker and put it down here now that all the worms have been relocated into here. And that should get us to the point where we can consider that as really for the final haul out. Flipping the sticker will enable us to reclassify the system as not active anymore and simply storing castings, kind of like what you see over here. Flipped label means storing castings until such a time that we can get it into just a bucket or something. So a couple of things to do in a couple different systems over here. So we're going to get to work. Alright, so we're going to start in here in the system that we want to get decommissioned here once and for all. This is some of my my crushed pulverized eggshell. It's got a good bit of weight to it, and that was the whole idea, was that I've heard a number of times people mentioning how the added weight or the pressure is something that the worms crave or like or whatever. So I thought that as long as we're trying to bait out any lingering worms that might still be in this stuff, by increasing the pressure where the bait was, we might also increase our chances of rounding up some worms. I believe it was celery. It's got such a distinct appearance to it with those long strands. And, you know, I don't want to allow any worms that might have come together to make their way out of this material. So I'm actually going to sample a good chunk of this stuff. I already see one worm squirming around in here. There's another one. There's another one. Really nice castings surrounding them. And you know, what the heck, let's just probe a little bit deeper. Just in case we spot another worm or two, we could pull them out manually. But at this point, this is the last of it. I do see movement over here, so we'll get this little guy. The only worms we're expecting to see in here are babies at this point. The way that other system got populated originally was by pulling all the adult worms out of this system gradually over time. Over the course of 4 separate haul outs, we had removed what we thought to be all the adult worms. All that remained after that was babies and cocoons, basically. We selectively chose the largest worms to be moved out. We effectively crippled this system's ability to produce more offspring and more babies by taking all the adult-sized worms out. And it was for that reason it seemed to me like just giving the system enough time for those left behind cocoons to hatch and for those babies to get rounded up would pretty much bring an end to the system. A lot of times at this point I would want to keep a box like this around, assuming that there was still a whole bunch of cocoons remaining in it and a whole lot of potential for babies to be born. But here we assume that the final roundup was of babies only, and that those babies were incapable of leaving behind any cocoons. So besides this, maybe, I don't know, how many did we get? 10? Not many, but whatever. We've collected up a number of baby worms here to bring over into the adult bin at this point. I just thought I might leave behind some of these nice castings, but whatever. We'll just bring this all over here, even a chunk of leftover bedding. And at this point, this is really nothing more than just storing castings at this point. We're going to cover it up, let it be protected from further drying. But the last thing I want to extract from here, besides the worms, is the Northeast Worms sticker. We'll put it onto the other system because that's really where the Northeast Worms reside now. And until such a time that this is an emptied bin, this label will stay on here to help me remember which system it was. So let's go put this on the floor next to the other one, and then we can get the 130-day system out here. Well, you know, something I don't like to see, which is just a dead worm on the top surface of your system. I assume he's dead. Yeah, he's just a piece of jerky at this point. Poor little guy. I guess this plastic covering is just so thorough that any worms that get out might have a hard time working their way back in. It seems like we might have had the same situation occur here on a couple occasions. But in this case, it seems like the worms might have actually gotten into the plastic bag and been unable to escape, the poor little guys. Oh boy. Well, you know, I thought about not allowing this to remain as sort of a threat. And I guess some of these worms, some worm types are perhaps a little bit more adventurous and curious. So I might have to do something about that, maybe orient that opening in such a way that worms don't find themselves there and get into trouble. Was he just coming up through that hole in the paper and just stopped and gave up? I don't know what's going on here. Alright, well at least this little guy looks pretty good here on top. This guy still moving? Yay, yay, yay. I don't know why, it just probably not too big of a deal, but it just doesn't really seem like the ideal initial encounter with the system, opening it up and finding all those sort of things. Hopefully we'll see an improvement as we work our way down. We do have a lot of paper and cardboard and stuff like that in here. We bought all this stuff along with the worms when we did the final haul out of worms from the old container. So in that old container we had that piece of bubble wrap, and that was about it, but all these other things were used previously. So for example, this was how we separated the baiting area, the collection area, from the finished castings. So this piece of cardboard has a bunch of holes in it. There's a sort of a visual divider. I believe these pieces of newspaper also came from the other system. Maybe even the coffee filters below it. So we've got a good amount of bedding here. Right now, you know, this stuff isn't really even serving the purpose of bedding. It's just sort of top cover paper in a way. To me, real bedding is the stuff that's down lower and the stuff that the worms are able to kind of squirm around in between and hang out in, and possibly even utilize it as carbon food source. Up here on the surface, it seems like it might get a little bit neglected. My thought was that perhaps if we find that now, finally, after 20 days since the last feeding, if we find that the food's been pretty much depleted, then maybe we'll add feeding, and that would account for the system's 14th feeding over time. 14th? No, 15th. That would be the system's 15th feeding. It's already had 14 feedings, so that was some of the other information I had written over here on the board. We talked a little bit about what we wanted to accomplish with the completed system, but here in the active system, 130-day-old system, last fed 20 days ago. So there's a couple things here where there was a straw that we were kind of monitoring the progress of, so I'm just curious to see how that's coming along, probably still in there intact. But there was this idea of a warm end and a cold end. And in the past, we had noticed how the side of the bin that was facing into the room, and in this case it's this side here, the side that doesn't have the label, because we switched it. Usually that's the side that has the label that's facing into the room so I could read the label. But we had a theory that that side was more occupied by worms because it was facing inside the room and maybe getting a little bit extra warmth, as opposed to the side that was up against the wall, which was dry. Here too, a worm stuck to the wall and dead. Same thing with a bunch of these little pot worms, these little white suckers all over the wall. Now, I'm wondering if maybe replacement of the plastic in such a way that it allows for a little bit more airflow might be a good idea at this point. Let me get rid of these chunks of hot melt glue. Before we get too far along, let's just go ahead and release these few worms that we brought over. Tossing in these little few chunks of leftover celery, if you want to consider those as leftovers even. Okay. So now another of the things on my to-do list over here did actually pertain to all of this paper here on the top. It's just referred to as mixing in the bedding. And it did seem like it would be a good idea to get this stuff submerged down into the material so that maybe it gets broken down as opposed to just sitting out on the surface. And I thought that if we did find that maybe this system would receive its 15th feeding today, then we could use it as the foundation for adding the food. And then maybe by being in the close proximity of food, it would get a little bit more attention, get broken down a little bit more. But I guess that all depends on whether or not we're even feeding in here today, you know? I mean, the reason we didn't feed when we were in here 10 days ago when we did the final haul out of worms and release of worms into here, the final haul out of worms from the other system, was because we noticed leftover kiwi, leftover apple. There was leftovers from the previous feeding, but 10 days have passed since then, and perhaps now we'll see fewer leftovers. Maybe we'll consider it appropriate to add perhaps one more feeding, a 15th feeding, which in a lot of cases does end up being the last feeding of my worm system. So I guess besides some of those other things, there's also mango seed. The seed's actually inside this tough husk. So I mean, I didn't even really count any of these really slow composting sort of items. I think there might have been other things too. There's a good amount of moisture down here. That would also help these, here's the straw. I don't know. Not sure if this is going anywhere, if it's even worth keeping in the system. Here's some banana stem. I don't know. It seems, it does almost seem like the really damp feeding area is like the ideal place to put a lot of this paper and cardboard. The worms would probably see a lot of that paper and cardboard as just more food. These are the types of worms that really do enjoy eating this sort of stuff, this carbon-based paper and cardboard type materials. So makes me even wonder if adding more food is necessary, or do we just give them carbon from now on and treat this system as sort of already being in that mode of foraging. That was another consideration I wanted to leave on the table. I didn't want to force an additional feeding into this system if it didn't seem appropriate to do so. I just figured that we would do so only if it made good sense to. This is another mango seed. It actually looks like the seed is kind of adhering to the husk, and we just actually tore the seed or broke it somehow down the middle by doing that. This would seem to be leftovers of something. I don't know. This must be the kiwi, because the kiwi has that greenish color on the inside, has this sort of a tough little stem, but then this weird tougher outer skin that seems to take a little longer to get eaten than the rest of the stuff. The rest of the stuff I would assume is for the most part gone now. So I mean, it's hard to imagine that those two seed husks are going to account for much nourishment. The worms will be able to obviously continue nibbling away at this stuff gradually. A few of them that could squeeze in here and share. But I don't really count those as being a really nourishing item or a substantial meal for a system. Here we've got another chunk of the same stuff, far further along than the other two. So we had a number of mango seeds in here. I'm so tempted to just kind of push all this damp stuff outwards, and then maybe at the end use what's on the outer edges to cover up with, and maybe submerge all of this carbon-based stuff that was top covering previously, all this cardboard, all these coffee filters, all this paper, get it down low, and then pile some food on top, some stuff that's going to emit some nice juices. It's going to dampen all that paper and make it into perhaps a really good final feeding for these worms to try to break down all that lingering cardboard and paper, although, you know, at some point we might decide that we'll just extract those things and start trying to move the worms out of this material if they don't make a lot of progress. But I think we're going to give that a try. You know, at 130 days of age, I would say that this system still could go for a couple months in order to not only break down these chunks of paper, cardboard that are going to go down in the feeding area, but whatever food we bring down for them, as well as everything else that still remains throughout this material, of which there's a good amount of it too. Even these leftover bits of food here. So I think I'm going to head up to the kitchen, grab some stuff that we can throw in here alongside all of this bedding, and then we'll probably end up closing this thing up for quite a while just to let this feeding, probably its last feeding, you know, ride out and get consumed. So let me pause now, head upstairs, get these little guys a little something to eat, and then we'll pick up where we left off when I get back. So what they're going to get here is some pumpkin, which is something they should really enjoy. Probably won't last too long. And as a foundation for this feeding, I would normally want to throw down some bedding, but I guess what I am going to use is a little bit of just used stuff. So that's at the very, very bottom. Hopefully not too many worms in it. Hopefully most of the stuff out here on the surface has already been evacuated. Worms not liking the light from above, although these are a worm type that usually doesn't react quite as much to the light from overhead. These African nightcrawlers, usually if you want to drive worms down into the material that they're inhabiting, you can use light to accomplish that, but with these types of worms, they just don't respond quite as much to that. And I guess the reason I was hoping to lay down a few layers of stuff other than occupied material like this stuff here was because these chunks of pumpkin are frozen, and I just don't want to be resting this I don't want to be resting this stuff up against any unsuspecting worms, having them freeze. So I assume that this is just something that they're not going to take too long on. They're probably going to enjoy this meal here. It's going to exude a good amount of moisture too as it thaws. In the past, I've sort of pre-thawed chunks of frozen pumpkin like this in preparation for feeding, and the stuff just collapses under its own weight and leaves a huge puddle behind. So the stuff will definitely spew out a good amount of moisture. And this stuff is luckily pretty damp too, but I have a feeling that if we kind of surround the food with it, with these pieces of newspaper, with these coffee filters, I think we had a few more over here too, right? This stuff will all get a good amount of traffic from the worms coming over for the moisture, perhaps taking a little nibble on the pumpkin, but probably being more interested in consuming the paper products surrounding the kitchen scraps. Although pumpkin isn't really a kitchen scrap, I guess it's more leftover Halloween decoration getting utilized as worm food now. Alright, so there's a few other things we, I guess, pulled out of the feeding areas that we can get back down in there. Here too, this is top covering, these pieces of coffee filter. At this point, everything's going to be submerged below the surface, hopefully getting a whole lot more traffic. And then I guess the whole idea here was to give ourselves an opportunity to see how this side of the bin, which was facing into the room, was occupied by worms. Did they gravitate towards the warmer side of the bin, or the side of the bin that it's assumed to be warmer because it's inside the room, versus the side that's up against the wall where it's a little bit chillier with the cool winter air coming down off the side of the building structure? I don't know. There's a good number of worms hanging out here, whether it's for the warmth or for what, I don't know. But I guess just for a quick comparison, we can take a peek at how things look over on the opposite edge. This opposite edge is the one that was facing the room. I'm sorry, I got them mixed up. Usually the side that's facing the room comes in, faces this way. This is the side that was facing into the room, not this side. This is the side that was up against the wall for the past 10 days. So here's where the side that's expected to be possibly a little warmer is. And it does seem to me like it's much more heavily occupied by worms. Much more heavily occupied than where the food was. Or the side that was up against the wall. Yeah. So I guess our little experiment of switching the orientation of the bin around did in fact prove that these worms are gravitating towards the warmer side of the bin in pursuit of the warmer temperatures, it would seem. You know what, let's let these little guys get situated here. There should be a little bit of a squirming party going on. Like I said, these guys don't react to the light quite as readily as other types of worms, but maybe we could just let them burrow down for a moment or two, and then we'll get back to sealing up this system and letting things continue. Alright, I think that was enough fun. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch this again. So now the side that's got the label on it, which is over here. Can I tip it enough without making a huge mess? I'm just worried that this stuff is going to avalanche onto me. So now this will go back to being the side of the bin with the label facing into the room, where there's going to be a little bit more warmth, you know, just coming from the room, as opposed to what's up against the wall, which is a little bit chillier, due to it being exposed to some of that cold outside air that sneaks in against the wall. And then maybe all these worms will start to feel that, hey, it's getting a little chilly again. Let's go find a warmer place to hang out, and they'll make their way over to this side, finding it a little bit more comfortable, and they'll probably huddle up over there. And maybe now that we're foraging, maybe we can actually, you know, use that to our advantage, kind of cause the worms to go back and forth through the middle section, which is where all the paper and cardboard, and at this point the pumpkin too, the last feeding, has been applied. And maybe the foraging can be done in such a way that we sort of actively try to move the worms back and forth across the stuff that we want to see them break down. So I've gone ahead and I swapped out that piece of plastic that was covering things here, the one that the poor little worms got stuck inside of. I've gone ahead and I put that over on top of the castings to keep them nice and damp, not lose any more of their moisture to evaporation. And what was covering things on the now complete bin was this here, this piece of bubble wrap, which should allow for a little bit more airflow underneath, and there's no closed pockets that worms can really get stuck in. I mean, it's not totally true, because some of these bubbles are burst, so the worms can sometimes sneak into them. But getting out should be a lot easier than an entire large plastic bag. So we're gonna put things back up on the shelf. But now that other container's not there on the top shelf, this one gets elevated up to the top shelf. It's one of my oldest bins now. So I'm going to take care of getting this put back in place, and I'm going to get things cleaned up around here. Oh, you know what? Almost forgot. We've still got a final thing to take care of here, right? Which is bringing over the sticker to show what type of African night crawlers these are. The ones that we got from Gaetano. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.